Have you ever woken up one morning and realized you no longer care about anything? No sadness, no joy, no desire. Just a vast emptiness swelling in your chest. It's not depression. It's not pessimism. It's a strange feeling. You've come too far to turn back, but you no longer know what you're moving forward for. All the goals that once excited you now feel like faded lines in your memory. All the relationships that once anchored you now feel like dreams nearing their end. You don't understand what happened. You just know. You are no longer who you used to be. And that's the moment your soul begins to enter another land, the land of true awakening. Carl Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Maybe you're in that very moment where light no longer saves you and darkness no longer frightens you. Have you ever noticed? Some people don't need to say a word, don't need to argue, don't need to draw a knife or slam the table. They just withdraw. No drama, no warning, just an absence deep enough, and everything around them begins to unravel. The air changes. The people who used to pull their emotional strings grow impatient, confused, and wondering what they did wrong. Their silence becomes a mirror, reflecting the chaos within others. And the funny thing is, they didn't do anything. They just stopped. They no longer react like before, no longer get pulled into drama, no longer serve as the emotional buttons others press to vent, to seek comfort, to trap them in the unnamed games of relationships. And I ask you, what if one day you did the same? What if you stopped replying to messages instantly? Stopped trying to understand others before understanding yourself? Stopped running after someone's rage that was never yours to calm? Stopped explaining? Stopped defending? Stopped justifying? What would happen? Are you afraid? Afraid of being misunderstood? Afraid of being called cold, heartless, changed, difficult? I know you are. But I also know there's another fear, far deeper. The fear of living your entire life being manipulated without realizing it. The fear of being controlled by a glance, a word, a pregnant silence. The fear that your energy is being drained by those who never return even a scent of genuine love. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So look closely. Who goes mad when you disappear? Who reacts the strongest when you go quiet? Who starts attacking, mocking, calling you strange, abnormal, changed? Who finds you distant when you've just started getting closer to yourself? The answer may surprise you, because it's not the ones who love you. It's the ones who used to control you reflexively. They didn't need to tie you up. They just needed you to always react. React to their emotions. React to their needs. React to guilt. React to silence. React to the nice guy role you've played for far too long. And here's the truth. No one tells you. Most people don't love you. They love the role you play. They love your vulnerability. They love how you're always available. They love that you don't know how to say no. They love your quiet endurance every time they're wrong, but won't take responsibility. And when you begin to withdraw from that role, the real chaos begins. I call it the chaos of those who once manipulated you without knowing it. You feel tired. empty, like you've lost motivation. But what's gone isn't your will to live. What's gone is the auto-response machine you used to survive. You used to live to react, not to be present. Since childhood, you were taught to be nice, to be polite, to answer quickly, to always appear understanding. And you believed that if you were always there, someone would stay. If you were good enough, kind enough, sacrificial enough, they wouldn't leave. But no one told you this. The more accessible you are, the more you're taken advantage of. The more predictable you are, the more manipulable you become. The more you're always there, the more invisible you become. What is abundant stops being valued. What is cheap loss worth? What is always ready is mistaken for an obligation. And you, if you don't realize this soon, will become the emotional dump button others use to release their pain and forget about you once they feel better. This so-called emotional responsibility you carry, maybe you never even agreed to it. You just learned to carry it, like a survival instinct. And Jung called that persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, to be loved, to avoid abandonment. But masks come at a price. The longer you wear them, the further you drift from yourself. The better you play the role, the more you become a ghost in your own life. Someone who lives to soothe others, but has never truly lived for themselves. I don't write this to make you rebellious. I write this so you begin to ask, who deserves your presence? Who is worthy of the energy, time, and compassion you give every day? And who doesn't, not even one breath of yours? Because I know you're tired. Tired of always being fine. Tired of being the peacemaker. Tired of living in a body drained of energy, but still forced to hold space for others' emotions. But no one's coming to untie you. You have to do it yourself. Starting with what seems like the simplest thing, withdrawal. Not a withdrawal for revenge, but withdrawal to return home. Not silent to punish, but silence to finally hear yourself after so long. Not cutting ties out of hatred, but cutting because your predictability is slowly killing you in relationships that only take. And you'll see, the moment you stop showing up reflexively, people start panicking. No one left to blame, no one to lean on, no one to call understanding every time they need someone to save them from their own shadow. I won't tell you it'll be easy. Withdrawing from a role you've played too long is a kind of death. A silent death of the old self. A funeral no one attends, but also the resurrection of something deeply real in you that's long been forgotten. Presence without permission. Existence without reaction. Worth without performance. Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the journey to becoming a whole self. And that journey begins not with an announcement, but with a withdrawal so deep, others can no longer control you with a sigh, a look, or a guilt trip. That's the day the game ends. And from that moment on, you're no longer a puppet of others' emotions. You hold the strings, and you'll begin to understand something painful but liberating. Those who truly love you will learn to love your silence too. Those who don't will retreat the moment you're no longer their tool. You think strength lies in a tough body? in unbreakable willpower, in limitless endurance and sacrifice? I used to believe that too, until I realized not everyone is tired because they work too hard. Some are exhausted not from lack of sleep, but from living too long in a constant state of energy leakage without even knowing it. Carl Jung called it psychic energy, the energy of the psyche. It can't be seen with the eyes, but it can be felt by the soul. It's not measured by clocks or calories. It's measured by a feeling, the feeling of still being yourself, or having become a hollow ghost in someone else's life. Every time you react unconsciously, you lose energy. Every time you reply to a message you didn't want to. Every time you engage in a conversation just to please. Every time you try to understand others, while no one tries to understand you. Every time you nod when your heart screams no. A part of your life force leaves your body, and like a leaking glass, you never feel full. You always feel lacking energy, lacking inspiration, lacking motivation, lacking a reason to wake up tomorrow with a whole heart. But the problem isn't life. It's how you distribute your energy. Have you ever noticed? Why does a 15-minute chat with this person energize you, while another, even without conflict, makes you want to vanish from the earth in silence? Why does one person make you want to live, while another makes you feel like you're slowly dying from within? Jung didn't believe the mind was just a reflex machine. He believed it was a living energy system. And like all energy systems, if unprotected, it gets exploited. No spells needed, no voodoo. Just someone who knows how to make you react is enough to hijack a piece of your soul. Some people don't need to control you with power. They just need to make you explain, make you feel guilty, make you afraid to be silent. And they manipulate you through your very instinct to be good, which you never dared to remove. You think you're living by choice. But the truth is, most of your emotional responses are old programs written in childhood. A glance makes you shrink. A silence makes you scramble to prove. A blame makes you bow in apology, even when you did nothing wrong. That's not love. That's manipulation, disguised as the ego's need to be nice. And then you wonder, why don't I feel motivated anymore? Why do I wake up feeling like all belief in myself has evaporated? I'll tell you why. Because you've spent too much energy on things that never gave you equal value in return. You're not living. You're being used. Jung once warned, "What you resist persists." The more you react to nonsense, the deeper it etches into your emotional nervous system. The more you explain, the more you're equated. The more you clarify, the more you're caught in the loop. And the price is, your mental clarity gets shredded bit by bit. Worse still, when you live in constant psychological exhaustion, you become more vulnerable to manipulation than ever. Opportunists can smell you. Manipulators see you from miles away. Not because you're weak, but because you have no energetic boundaries. You're always open, always available, always willing. And in a world where everyone is looking for somewhere to dump their emotions, people like you are prized possessions, to be drained and discarded as if they were never needed at all. Jung called a healthy state of mind the ability to retain energy within the system. That means knowing how to say no without feeling guilty, knowing how to stay silent without feeling small, knowing how to be still before taking action, knowing how to withdraw without feeling the need to explain. And that's not coldness, that's energetic sovereignty. So the question is, where is your energy leaking? Are you reacting automatically to things unworthy of your attention? Are you engaging in conversations just to keep the peace? Are you playing the role of the healer in a relationship that leaves you bandaging yourself every night? I'm not writing this to make you doubt everyone. I'm writing this so you begin to look at yourself as an energy system that needs protection. You are not an emotional hotline for others. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your silence. You owe no one an immediate reaction. Instead, I invite you to start over by pulling your energy back in, by observing instead of reacting, by holding rather than explaining, by stepping back to feel what is truly a call from within and what is merely an echo of an unhealed wound. And then you'll see, with remarkable clarity, that when energy is preserved, you begin to be present. And that presence alone is enough to change everything. Because a person who knows how to hold their energy can no longer be easily controlled. A person who says no in silence causes every manipulative strategy to fall apart. A person who doesn't react is no longer playing someone else's game. Have you ever felt tired, even when nothing obvious was happening? Have you ever felt like you're living a life you didn't choose, but also didn't dare to step away from? Have you ever felt like you're playing a role so well, you no longer know where the act ends and you begin? If you've ever felt that, then I must tell you plainly, you might be trapped inside a psychological projection someone else has placed upon you. Carl Jung called it projection. When someone can't face themselves, they project the rejected parts of their shadow onto others. And the scariest part is, those people are often closest to you. Family, lovers, friends, co-workers. They don't know they're manipulating, but they still do. Not with force, but with something far more dangerous, unspoken expectations. You became the one who understands, because in their eyes, that's how you were worthy of love. You became the strong one, because they needed someone to lean on. You became the good listener, because they never learned to heal themselves. You became the good child, the kind one, the one who's always okay. Not because that's who you truly are, but because they couldn't handle seeing you sad, weak, or angry. Gradually, you believed those roles were who you are. You wore the mask others handed you, afraid of watching your relationships crumble if you took it off. But here's what Jung warned. We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Which means you cannot truly heal if you keep living in the image others created instead of returning to yourself. Projection is a form of manipulation that doesn't require words. It happens in a loaded silence, in a disappointed glance when you no longer behave the way you used to, in a conditional compliment. You used to be so sweet. In that quiet guilt when all you really want is to be left alone. Do you see it? You are not loved for being you. You are loved for playing the role they need. And the most brutal part is, when you start to step out of that projection, you'll be attacked. not because you did something wrong, but because you no longer fit the role they depended on to avoid facing themselves. When you go silent, they say you're arrogant. When you withdraw, they say you're cold. When you speak your truth, they say you're negative. But the truth is, they don't know how to respond when you become you. Your unpredictability exposes their emptiness. Your withdrawal reveals the gap between two people that had only ever been bridged by familiar reactions. Your shift in energy renders their emotional games ineffective, and I know the hardest part is being misunderstood, being told you've changed as if that were a sin. But remember this: when you stop reacting the way you used to, the masks others placed on you begin to fall. And when the masks fall, they must face themselves. And not everyone can handle that truth. Then come the silent attacks, the ghosting with no explanation, the toxic insinuations, the late night calls just to see if you're still there. And if you respond, the game continues. Jung once said, "What we do not confront within ourselves will appear outside as fate. And if you're not awake, you'll live inside the roles others cast you in, moving from one relationship to the next, and call it destiny." Want to know what projection you're trapped in? Look at who reacts the most when you stop reacting. See who only loves you when you're sweet, pliable, and easy to manage. Notice who gets angry when you dare to be quiet, when you dare not to explain, when you dare not to apologize for someone else's feelings. They don't love you. They love the role you've mastered. They love being able to predict you, control you, drag you into emotional games they can't play alone. But when you withdraw, truly withdraw, when you stop running to explain, stop forcing yourself to be the adult, stop shrinking in fear of abandonment, you'll realize something both painful and freeing. Those who truly love you will learn to love your non-reaction. Those who don't will walk away because they no longer have a reason to stay. That is the price of taking off the mask, the cost of stepping out of the projection, the cost of real maturity, losing the role people adored, to return to the self that deserves respect. And within that unraveling, as every image others painted of you collapses, something truer, deeper, more enduring begins to form. Jung called it the transition between the persona and the self, between the social mask and the inner essence. It is the beginning of the individuation process, the journey from image to soul. A journey no one can walk for you, and a journey no one can stop once you begin. Have you ever seen someone panic because you said nothing? No yelling, no explaining, no pleading, no speaking. Just a timely absence, a silence deep enough, and suddenly the entire emotional game falls into chaos. I'm not talking about the silence of childish sulking. I'm talking about another kind of silence, what Jung called the highest form of psychological sovereignty. It's not the silence of the weak, but a conscious choice by a soul exhausted from having to constantly explain itself to people who never truly listen. You see, in this world, everyone's racing to speak, not to understand. Everyone wants to comment, to react, to to voice their take. Silence becomes uncomfortable, a sign of resistance, an act of defiance. But Jung once said, "In silence, we hear the voice of the soul." When you stop reacting, you begin observing. And as you observe, you start to notice the loops that have always repeated like a trance. You keep getting pulled into endless conversations, into emotions that aren't yours, into battles you don't need to win. Just because you're afraid, silence will break something fragile. But you don't realize it's because you're afraid of silence that others can control you. Because you always reply, always explain, always try to clear things up. And as long as you do, you're still in the game. But when you stop responding, you pull the plug on the entire manipulation machine. True silence is a sharp psychological move. It doesn't hurt with words, but it forces the other to face the void within themselves. When you don't react, they become unsettled because they can no longer control you through emotion. They can't bind you into the script of victim, savior, villain. Let me be blunt. Many people don't want love. They want an audience, and you've played that audience role for too long. Laughing when needed, applauding their sob stories, staying quiet at just the right moment so they could keep talking about themselves. But when you exit that role through silence, they can't handle it, because now they have to face themselves. No one left to affirm, to feed them, to understand, to yield. No more mirror, which you once were, reflecting their image to make them feel safe. No one left to blame, and in that void, their shadow begins to surface. Jung called this shadow work dash. When someone's silence becomes the mirror that no longer allows the shadow to hide. And that's when you truly see who's who. Those who truly love you will respect that silence. They'll know when to wait. They won't react out of panic. But the manipulators will begin to lose control. They'll provoke, mock, and bait. They'll try every trick to pull you back into the old script. Because your presence, and especially your reactions, are fuel for their hollow egos. But when your silence comes, not from resentment, but from clarity, then you finally break the emotional matrix you've been trapped in for far too long. And then something strange happens. You begin to have space, mental space, bodily space, soul space. Your mind is no longer full of imaginary arguments. Your heart no longer aches from stories of right and wrong. You breathe slower. You see clearly. And for the first time in a long while, you're no longer a character in someone else's story, but the lucid witness of your own. I know, you'll be misunderstood. You'll be called cold, scary, changed. But remember, your silence is not meant to hurt. It is the act of withdrawing energy from places no longer worthy. A deliberate act. A wordless declaration, I'm no longer playing by the old rules. Silence is a weapon, but not to defeat others. To reclaim yourself. When you no longer need to win with words, you begin to win with presence. Not every place needs you to be present. Not every question needs an answer. Not everyone deserves your energy. Selective silence is a sign of spiritual maturity. It signals that you're stepping out of reactive ego to live from a deeper, more conscious place. And I'll be honest, the deeper a person is, the less they speak. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they no longer need to say it. They know truth doesn't need presentation. Love doesn't need proof. Sovereignty doesn't need to shout. And that's when they begin to seem mysterious, but irreplaceable. There comes a time, after all the silences, after all the unexplained withdrawals, after you stop straining to be the understanding one, something begins to happen. Not a thunderbolt, not a sudden explosion, but a quiet unraveling. You no longer know who you are, at least not within the old frame. You no longer fit into the roles that once felt so perfectly tailored. You're standing in a wide, empty space where definitions are gone, labels have dissolved, and expectations have faded. And you panic. Why? Because your old self, the persona Jung called the social mask, is disappearing. The ego that reacted to be recognized. The ego that strained to keep others from leaving. The ego that did everything proper, right, acceptable, just to avoid being abandoned, now has no ground to stand on. And you, the one who lived in those reflexes, feel as though you've lost everything. But it's not a loss. It's metamorphosis. Do you remember the last time you truly feel free? Not watched, not judged, not told to behave. Maybe when you were a child, before you knew what was adorable or too much. When you lived in the raw truth of your being, when you still dared to cry, to say no, to disappear just to be alone. Then you grew up, learned to be likable, learned to fit in, learned to be an adult, learned to endure. But now, for the first time in a long time, those lessons are being forgotten. Naturally, subconsciously, because your soul is starting to call you back. And in the unraveling of the ego that once served others, you begin to touch something else. No more need to prove. No more hunger to be understood. No more urge to react to what isn't yours. Jung called this stage the gateway to individuation, the journey to becoming a whole person. But to walk through that gate, you must enter the state of emptiness. Empty of the old self, empty of images, empty of people-pleasing habits. And this emptiness is the sacred soil, where your true self can begin to root. Many stop at this threshold because it's uncomfortable. You'll feel like you're no one. Friends grow distant. Family no longer understands. Old relationships start to fracture, and you think you're losing your life. But no, you're being reborn, because the person you used to be was merely the result of performed roles, of compromise, of adjusting to survive in someone else's world. And now, without the roles, you begin to write your own script. But write what? With what? From where? From the silence you were brave enough to walk through. From the loneliness you no longer run from the nights where no one was there, and you no longer needed anyone to be. From the small voice inside you've ignored for so long, just to satisfy the noise outside, you begin to feel a new kind of light, not one to shine out to the world, but to illuminate within. You begin to sense something. Only you can feel a belonging to yourself, a connection to the unnameable, a presence that needs no introduction. Others won't understand. And that's a good sign, because only when you begin to depart from collective expectations can you start to approach your original self. Jung once said, "Individuation is not integration, it is separation." Separation to become unique. And I believe that's why the initial emptiness is so necessary. No one walks into wholeness with a suitcase full of old roles. No one touches the true self while still wearing a mask. No one is truly free if they're still distorted by the gaze of others. I know you're still in the in-between, no longer the old self, but not yet been defined by the new. No longer part of the crowd, but not belonging anywhere yet. I call this the soul's wilderness, and it's terrifying. But also where all rebirth begins. Don't rush. Don't replace the old image with a new one too soon. Don't name yourself just yet, when you've only just begun removing the names others gave you. Stay a while in the blank space, in the unknowing, in the uncertainty, in the invisibility, because from there, a new person will emerge, not from a need to be seen, but from the depths of a soul that no longer fears being misunderstood. And when that person steps forward, you won't need to shout to be seen. You won't need permission to be yourself. You won't be anyone's adorable version. You'll become someone who cannot be replaced, not because you're different, but because you dared to transform, dared to be no one, in order to finally become yourself. One day, you'll pause and ask, why am I always tired? Why do I give so much and still feel empty? Why do people leave me so easily, even when I've tried so hard? And then you'll realize, not because you're not good enough, not because you're unlucky, but because you are too easily accessible. You're always there, always replying, always trying to understand, always nodding when you should have said no, always showing up, even when you're drained to the bone. And so, you became something easy. And in this world, what is easy is rarely treasured. People don't respect what's always available. They don't value light until they've been swallowed by darkness. They don't appreciate the one who's always there until that person disappears. And I'll say this plainly, the one who's always available will soon be treated as a tool, an emotional button. Others push for comfort, release, and entertainment, or to escape themselves. But tools aren't loved. Tools are used. And when you no longer serve the function, they'll discard you. Look for another tool. No thank you. No regret. That's when you face a bitter truth. Real love doesn't come from unconditional availability. Real love comes from discernment, from knowing how to say no, from knowing when to stay and when to walk away, from knowing your energy is finite and not everyone deserves to touch it. Jung called this a kind of spiritual discipline. When you stop living on autopilot and start living with intention, when you stop reacting and start choosing, when you stop trying to hold everything together and finally learn how to let go. This no longer being available at first will make many people uncomfortable. They'll say you've changed. They'll call you distant, cold, less loving. But listen to me. It's not because you've changed. It's because you're no longer convenient for them. Because before, you were always willing to be the healer, the listener, the emotional carrier, the one who was there. But now, you've started doing something deeply inconvenient to those who are emotionally dependent. You're no longer showing up whenever they need, and that terrifies them. Not because they love you, but because you used to be their mirror, the shoulder they didn't have to build, the supporting role that helped them feel okay. Now you're gone, and that absence forces them to face themselves. And not everyone is ready for that, so they'll attack with silence, with distance, with emotional manipulation, with words designed to make you feel guilty. You'll feel like you're losing people. But in truth, you're only losing connections that never held real love, only dependency. And then something strange will happen. You begin to be valued, not because you give more, but because you know when not to. You begin to gain worth, not because you're easy to understand, easy to please, easy to predict, but because you've started building boundaries. Because you protect your time, your space, and your energy. Because you no longer react by default, but live with sovereignty. Your distance becomes a filter. Only those with depth, heart, and sensitivity dare to remain. The rest fall away by the natural law of things. Jung said, "No one can become whole if they're still trying to please the crowd." And I'll add this: no one can keep their soul intact if they're the most accessible person in the room. From now on, be selective. Choose where you go. Choose what you say. Choose who you keep. Choose which conversations to engage in. Choose the moment to be silent as a ritual of self-preservation. And if you're misunderstood, remember, your silence explains itself. Those who are meant to understand will. Those who don't are not worth your energy. The deepest kind of growth never happens in a crowd. It doesn't happen in long conversations, warm hugs, or well-timed encouragement. True growth always happens in quiet. In the night, you lean against a wall, unsure of your direction. In the morning, when no one calls your name, and you begin to ask yourself who you are. In those moments when no one understands, and yet you refuse to shrink just to be understood. And that is the gate. The gate that no one shows you. The gate that only opens when you're brave enough to become invisible to the world in order to become present to yourself. Jung called it the solitude of the soul, not a lack of others, but a fullness that no longer needs to be filled by others. At first, it feels like a loss. You'll feel like you're losing relationships, losing connection, losing identity. You'll feel like you're drifting in a void without an anchor, without anyone staying. But then, something quiet begins to arise. A stillness that isn't frightening, but gentle. A presence that isn't loud, but full of weight. A feeling I'm home. Not a house of bricks and walls, not someone else's arms, but a place inside you that's been waiting for you to return all this time. Where you're no longer someone's child, someone's role, someone's expectation. Where do you stop living in reaction and start living in an awakened being? And then you understand what life has tried to teach you through pain, rejection, and exhaustion. No one is coming to save you, and no one needs to, because the one you've been looking for, the one you thought would come, is the deepest version of you, buried under every forced nod, every needless apology, every role that was loved but never allowed to be real. Now that self steps forward, silent, peaceful, no need to prove, no need to explain, no need for agreement. And you, the one who once feared being misunderstood, abandoned, called changed. Now smile at all of it, because you understand the price of freedom is being misunderstood. The price of authenticity is being set apart. But the reward is something no one can ever take from you. Wholeness. You no longer need love built on sacrifice. You no longer need a connection born from endurance. You no longer need to stay in relationships just to not feel alone. Because now you've learned how to be with yourself, not sad, not hiding, not afraid, just staying. Staying with afternoons that need no messages, staying with a cup of tea no one shares, staying with a sadness that needs no rescue, staying with a dream that needs no validation. And I'll be honest, when you reach that place, everything changes. Not because the world changes, but because you stop trying to make it change to suit you. You begin to choose instead of react. Begin to say no without guilt. Begin to speak less, not from anger, but from understanding that not everyone deserves to hear the voice that comes from your core. Your presence now is no longer something just anyone can touch. It becomes a blessing, a sacred space, an energetic field that only those who know how to honor it may enter. And then the ones who leave you no longer matter, because the ones who stay are the ones who see you without the mask. And if you've come this far, if you're still reading these words, then I want to tell you one last thing. You've begun the return. Not the return to someone else, but the return to your own soul. And in a world that's always trying to pull you away from your essence, to choose return is the most radical act of all. If this journey speaks to you, leave something below. No need for eloquence, no need for length. Just one line. I have chosen to return. I want to see how many of you here are ready to live a life not needing to be understood. only needing to be real. See you in the sacred stillness ahead.